The moment the Xelari delegation stepped off their transport onto the rocky clearing outside the research station in Utah, one of them recoiled sharply. "What is that creature?" asked the smaller Xelari, his translucent blue skin pulsing with unease. He pointed a thin limb at the large German shepherd sitting calmly beside a man in a dust-streaked denim jacket. The man stood, brushing red soil from his jeans. "That's Scout," he said. "He's my dog." The Xelari blinked slowly, an expression their translator had come to interpret as confusion. "You permit this quadruped to remain near you. It has teeth. It could bite." The man scratched behind Scout's ears. The dog closed his eyes in contentment. "Only if you try something stupid," the man said. "Name's Everett McConnell." "Welcome to Earth." The taller Xelari, whose name was Tharn, tilted his head. "We were briefed on human biological systems, your planetary weather, and your nutritional requirements, but the presence of pets was not emphasized. Why do you keep lesser creatures?" Everett raised an eyebrow. "Lesser? That's your first mistake." Scout stood up, tail wagging. He circled once around Everett before sitting again, still watching the Xelari with quiet, alert eyes. Tharn stepped forward. "We do not keep creatures for companionship. It is inefficient. Every member of our society performs a function." "Then you've never had a dog," Everett replied. "Scout's more than companionship. He's been with me through wildfires, floods, even that mess in Montana with the sinkhole. He saved my life twice." Tharn's tone remained clinical. "Statistically implausible. A non-sentient mammalian organism providing meaningful assistance to a complex life form like yourself. Stick around," Everett said. "You'll see." The Xelari delegation had arrived for a 2-week observational exchange with Earth's Intercultural Relations Corps. Everett, a field specialist for terrestrial hazards, had been assigned as their host. He wasn't thrilled he'd been pulled off wildfire watch duty in Arizona to babysit 2 aliens who were already judging his best friend. Scout sneezed, then laid down in the dirt, front legs crossed. Everett glanced down at him. "You smell something?" Scout's ears twitched. He remained still. The Xelari watched the exchange with interest. Later that afternoon, Everett led the visitors along a craggy path near the canyon rim. The air was dry, the sun sharp. Scout padded ahead, occasionally looking back to make sure they were following. Tharn gestured toward a cluster of sandstone formations. "Your environment is unstable. The crust fractures often. Why do you live here?" "We don't all live here," Everett said. "Some of us just work in places like this. It's a geological hotbed good for studying fault lines, thermal vents, and erosion patterns." Scout suddenly stopped. His tail stiffened, ears perked. He let out a low, rumbling growl. Everett paused. "Hey." "What is it?" Scout stepped sideways off the trail and looked toward a narrow ridge. Everett followed his gaze. "Hold up," he said to the Xelari. He crouched beside Scout and pulled a small device from his belt. It hummed softly as he scanned the soil near the edge of the trail. "Ground shifting," he muttered. Scout sensed it. Tharn looked unconvinced. "It is coincidence. Your animal cannot detect tectonic activity." Everett stood. He can't tell you what's happening, but he knows when something's wrong. He hears subtle shifts, feels vibrations. "Things we overlook." Scout barked once, sharply. A second later, the ground beneath the trail collapsed. A slab of rock the size of a mattress broke away and tumbled into the canyon. The Xelari flinched. Dust billowed upward in a brown cloud. Everett stepped back. "You were about 2 steps from going down with that." The smaller Xelari, Varn, made a stuttering sound that the translator struggled to process. Tharn remained silent for a long moment. "That was not coincidence," Tharn said finally. "Nope," Everett said. "That was Scout." That night, back at the research station, the Xelari requested access to Scout's medical and neural data. Everett refused. "He's not a machine," he said. "You don't get to dissect him with your scanners just because he did something you didn't expect." Tharn folded his arms. "We only wish to understand." "You want to understand," Everett leaned forward. "Then spend time with him. Watch how he works. Don't treat him like a lab rat." Scout lay nearby, dozing. His chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm. The next morning, Tharn joined Everett and Scout on their run along the canyon rim. Varn stayed behind, preferring to review seismic data remotely. Scout ran just ahead, occasionally pausing to sniff a bush or glance back. "You do this every day?" Tharn asked. "Most days," Everett said. "Keeps me sharp, keeps Scout happy." "You allow the animal to dictate your routines?" "No, we work together. He gets exercise, I get a companion who can spot a rattler before I do." Scout barked, then veered left. Everett slowed. "He's found something." They followed Scout into a shallow ravine where a hiker lay on the ground, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "Hey," Everett knelt beside the man. "Can you hear me?" The man groaned. "Slipped, couldn't move." Everett turned to Tharn. "Call base." "We need an evac." Tharn complied without hesitation. Scout sat beside the injured man, licking his hand gently. Later, once the hiker had been airlifted out, Tharn spoke again. "That is the second time your animal has located danger before you." Everett shrugged. "He's got instincts. He's part of the team." Over the next week, the Xelari watched Scout more closely. They observed how he reacted to sound, movement, and scent. They noted his patterns during meals, naps, and patrols. Tharn even took to offering Scout dried meat treats, which the dog accepted with cautious tail wags. On the 10th day, a violent storm swept across the desert without warning. The station's sensors had failed to detect the rapid pressure drop. Winds howled and the sky turned green-gray. Everett shoved equipment into lockers. "Scout." Inside, the dog bolted in just as the first gust slammed against the station's side. The Xelari stumbled after him. Inside, lights flickered. The station groaned under the strain. Everett pulled out an emergency radio. "Base, this is McConnell. We've got a surprise cell over the ridge. Winds topping 70. Hunker down." Scout paced near the door, whining. "What is wrong with him?" Tharn asked. "He's nervous. He can feel it getting worse." "Is that reliable?" Everett didn't answer. He watched Scout, then looked at the ceiling. A deep rumble echoed overhead. "Basement." "Now." They raced down the narrow stairwell just as a deafening crack split the air. Part of the roof tore off. Dust and debris rained down. In the basement, they huddled together. Scout pressed close to Everett's leg. After the storm passed, they emerged to find the station's upper structure partially collapsed. Had they stayed above, they'd have been crushed. Tharn stood silently, his pale eyes wide. Everett scratched Scout's head. "He knew. Again?" Tharn nodded slowly. "I had assumed your species kept animals for emotional reinforcement. I now see that the relationship is more symbiotic." Everett smiled. "We help each other survive." Scout barked once, as if to agree. The final test came on the last day of the exchange. A tour group had gone missing near the southern ridge. Everett, Scout, and Tharn were dispatched to assist. They found the group huddled in a dry wash, dehydrated and disoriented. One man was missing. "We'll find him," Everett said. Scout sniffed the ground, then took off at a run. Everett followed, Tharn close behind. They found the missing man unconscious at the base of a cliff, heatstroke setting in. Scout barked until Everett knelt to check his pulse. "He's alive." "Barely." They stabilized him and called in a stretcher. As the medics lifted the man away, Tharn turned to Everett. "I misjudged your species' motivations. You do not keep pets. You form bonds." Everett nodded. "Exactly." Scout sat beside him, tail thumping softly. Tharn extended a hand and gently touched Scout's head. Scout licked his fingers. Everett chuckled. "He likes you." Tharn looked down at the dog, then up at the sky. "Perhaps our species has much to learn about trust." Scout barked once, and for the first time since their arrival, Tharn smiled. The canyon winds had settled by morning, but the air still carried the sharp scent of iron-rich dust and ozone. Everett crouched in the shallows of the wash, sleeves rolled past his elbows, guiding a stream of iodine into a narrow gash on Scout's front paw. "Hold still, buddy." "I know it stings." Scout huffed but didn't pull away. His eyes flicked toward Tharn, who stood a few feet back, watching without blinking. "You administer treatment manually," Tharn said. "There are automated kits even in your field units." "Why not use those?" Everett tore a strip from the hem of his shirt and began wrapping it snugly around Scout's foot. "Because half the time those kits misread fur as contamination and start cauterizing. I'm not burning my dog's leg because some software can't tell the difference between dirt and skin." Tharn tilted his head. "You override your tool's logic based on tactile judgment." "That's what hands are for," Everett said, tying off the bandage. "And experience." Scout licked his thumb once, then gently rested his head on Everett's knee. "I would not have expected such high pain tolerance from a creature with no defensive exoskeleton," said Varn, who had padded down the slope without a sound. His long fingers clutched a data panel, but he hadn't tapped it once since arriving. Everett stood slowly. "He's used to rough terrain, glass, thorns, hot rock. He doesn't like it, but he doesn't panic. That's the difference." Tharn stepped closer and crouched, mimicking Everett's earlier posture. "You treat him as a peer. Wouldn't be walking on my own 2 feet if I didn't." That afternoon, with Scout resting beneath a tarp and the wind low enough to not rip the fabric from its pins, Tharn requested Everett demonstrate how humans navigate with limited visibility. A dust veil had crept through the canyons, thinning light into a copper haze. The Xelari's ocular membranes adjusted automatically, but Everett's were wrapped in polarized lenses. "You're not using ocular augmentation," Varn observed. "I prefer analog," Everett replied. "Tech fails." "Nerves don't. You rely on unpredictability," Tharn said, "even in your own biology." Everett chuckled. "You ever see a human navigate a blackout with nothing but a lighter and a shoelace?" "No, I suspect I'm about to." They moved up the western ridge, the dust thickening. Scout limped along beside Everett, refusing to stay behind despite the wound. Tharn noticed the uneven gait but said nothing. As they climbed, Everett paused at an outcrop and pointed. "You see that split in the wall? That's a wind channel. Feels tighter today." "Something's pushing air into a pocket." Scout stood still, eyes fixed on the crevice. "I assume you intend to investigate?" Tharn asked. "Not yet, I'm waiting." For Everett crouched, picked up a small stone and tossed it toward the crack. It never hit the ground. A low sucking sound followed, then silence. "Vacuum pocket forming," he said. "Could mean a sinkhole developing under the ridge." Varn leaned forward, "but there is no visible collapse." "Exactly," Everett said. "You don't wait for the hole to swallow you to call it a hole." Scout barked once short, sharp, then looked west. Everett turned his head slowly. Nothing moved. Then the ground groaned. "Back," Everett said. "Now." They retreated as a chunk of the ridge collapsed inward, revealing a hollow dome beneath, carved by wind and time. It looked like one stomp would bring down the rest. Varn stared down into the chasm. "You evaluated the threat using a dog's posture and a thrown rock. And the air," Everett said, "and the silence. You learn to listen when the desert stops breathing." That evening, back at base, the Xelari asked for silence, not to meditate but to process. At dusk, Tharn approached the bench where Everett sat sharpening a blade with smooth, even strokes. Scout lay beside him, paw freshly cleaned and bandaged again. "You mentioned earlier," Tharn began, "that this animal has saved your life more than once. I now believe you. But I fail to understand how such behavior emerges. He has no directive." "Don't need one," Everett said. "He's not programmed, he chooses." "Why, what benefit does he gain?" Everett looked up. "He gets me." "And I get him." "That is not quantifiable. Neither is loyalty." The next morning, the earthquake monitoring office pinged the station. A tremor had registered in the northeastern quadrant, unusual depth, odd frequency. They wanted a visual confirmation of the terrain's stability. Everett agreed to make the run. "You will take the animal," Tharn said. "It was not a question, he's limping." "Yet he does not stay behind." Scout stood by the door, tail still, gaze locked on Everett. The northeast trail was narrow and twisted through overhangs that hadn't been maintained in decades. Old mining stakes jutted from the cliffs like rusted bones. Scout moved cautiously, placing weight only on his good paws. Everett let him lead, watching for signs of discomfort or hesitation. Halfway up the trail, Scout froze. No growl this time, just stillness. Everett stopped. "You feel that?" Tharn moved beside him. "The ground is quiet, exactly, too quiet." Scout stepped backward, then sat. Everett knelt and placed his hand on the stone. It was warmer than it should have been at that elevation. "Thermal bleed," he muttered. "Could be gas venting below." He stood and motioned them back. "We're not going up there." "There is no seismic activity," Tharn said. "The instruments don't smell sulfur," Everett cut in. "Or feel heat through boot soles, or notice when the birds go silent." They detoured through a ravine. Hours later, a rockfall obliterated the original trail. Scout had sensed it before the first pebble dropped. Back at base, Varn asked to scan Scout's olfactory system. Everett agreed on the condition that it happened while Scout was awake and could opt out. Scout sat perfectly still as the scanner hovered, then sneezed directly onto Varn's data panel. Varn wiped it clean with the corner of his tunic. "Your species emits affection through bodily fluids?" "Sometimes," Everett said. "Sometimes it's just a sneeze." In their final days, the Xelari grew quieter, not withdrawn, more thoughtful. They no longer asked why Scout followed Everett or how he understood danger. They watched. On their last night, Tharn stood by the fire pit outside the station. No flames, just orange coals and slow heat. Scout lay nearby, eyes half closed. "Your world is hostile," Tharn said. "Your biology is inconsistent, your methods erratic, yet you survive." Everett tossed a stick into the embers. "We don't just survive, you adapt, with creatures that should not be strategic assets." Everett nodded. "And yet," Tharn looked at Scout, "I will recommend a reevaluation of our companion policy." "Good. Not because we wish to domesticate, but because we may have underestimated what trust can do." Scout raised his head, then yawned. "Don't get mushy on him," Everett said. "He's still just a dog." Tharn crouched beside the fire. "Perhaps. But I have seen no technology that can match what he does without command." "Because he doesn't need permission," Everett said. "He just needs a reason." Scout stood, walked to Tharn, and sat beside him. Tharn hesitated, then reached out and rested his hand on Scout's back. The stars above were unfamiliar to the Xelari, but the warmth beside them was not. They sat in silence. Not to process, just to be, and Scout watched the darkness, still alert, just in case it moved. By the fourth morning following the dust storm, the temporary roof patch still held, and the canyon had finally settled into an uneasy calm. The air held a faint trace of ozone, but the winds had died, and the sun crept over the mesas with that same unapologetic glare it always had. Everett stood outside the station entrance, kneeling beside Scout, carefully snipping the last bit of adhesive wrap from the dog's paw. "You're clear," he said, brushing his fingers gently over the scarred fur. "Try not to chase anything suicidal for a couple days." Scout licked his lips and gave a tentative stretch, testing the paw. He walked a slow circle, then sat, his tail thumping once against the ground. Tharn watched from the shade of a ridge, arms folded. "I have reviewed the footage of the Northeast collapse again. Your prediction was made without any technology. You say that like it's a bad thing. I say it like I am still reconciling what I witnessed." Everett wiped his hands on his jeans. "You ever hike without a scanner?" "No, try it sometime. You might learn what your own feet are saying." Tharn didn't respond. Instead, his gaze shifted to Scout. "He has resumed movement without favoring the injured limb." Everett nodded. "He'll still feel it, but he trusts it now." "That's how healing works. First you protect, then you test, then you move through it." "Does that logic apply to your kind as well?" Everett straightened. "You mean people?" "I mean you, specifically." Everett looked down at Scout, who met his eyes for a beat too long. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it does." Back inside the station, Varn had cleared an entire section of the lab for what he called observational recalibration. The translation program struggled with the phrase, but Everett got the gist. It was less about collecting data now and more about understanding context. Varn had arranged his monitors to show overlapping footage: Scout alerting, Scout reacting, Scout resting without any interpretation overlays. Just raw visuals. He no longer asked for biometric readings. He just watched. At noon, Tharn requested Everett's participation in a joint exercise. The idea apparently had emerged from a private conversation between the two Xelari late the night before. "You rely on instinct," Tharn said. "We rely on systems. We wish to test both." Everett raised an eyebrow. "What kind of test? We will each navigate the same terrain. You with your methods and we with ours. The success metric is time and safety." Scout barked from behind him. "No, he's not running a race," Everett said. "He may accompany you," Tharn replied, "but he is not to lead." "You must. So you're setting rules for instinct now? I am attempting to level the field." Late afternoon, they stood at the base of a dry arroyo about 3 miles from the station. The terrain was jagged, with layers of brittle shale and occasional boulders that shifted with the wind. The endpoint was a flagged marker visible only through a narrow crevice 2 ridges over. Varn and Tharn stood at the left flank, back straight, carrying their compact sensor kits. Everett adjusted the strap on his canteen and tapped Scout's collar. "You're still benched," he muttered. "But I won't say no to you tagging along." Scout trotted beside him, tongue lolling. The Xelari activated their devices. A low hum followed, and then they moved in near-perfect unison, stepping lightly, scanning every few feet. Everett watched them go. Then he took a breath, scanned the sky, and began walking. The shale gave immediately underfoot, but he shifted his weight fast and moved to the firmer edge near a scrub bush. Scout followed his path precisely, nose low. By the second ridge, Everett already spotted the first problem. A flash of white mineral dust where it shouldn't have been, just under a rock lip. He crouched and brushed it aside. The soil underneath was loose, freshly disturbed, not sun-baked like the rest. He stood and detoured 3 yards west. Halfway through the detour, he heard the crunch, subtle but off. He looked uphill. Varn had stepped onto the exact patch Everett had avoided. The ground gave. Varn dropped to one knee, arms flailing as his scanning device tumbled from his grip. Tharn reached him in 2 strides, but not before the edge snapped. A cascade of shale slid down the slope, carrying Varn with it. Everett dropped his bag and sprinted. "Scout, stay." Scout froze. Everett reached Varn as he was trying to push himself upright, hand bleeding, left leg twisted under him. "Don't move," Everett said, kneeling. "That ankle's not right." Varn hissed, a low clicking sound that didn't translate. Everett examined the joint. Swelling had already started and the foot was angled slightly inward. A lateral sprain at best, possibly a fracture. He checked for pulses: dorsalis, pedis, and posterior tibial, both present. No major artery damage. "You lucked out," Everett said. "But you're not walking on it." Tharn arrived, silent but tense. "Help me stabilize it," Everett said, pulling a roll of gauze from his pack. Tharn hesitated. "I am not trained in field trauma." "Then mimic me." He guided Tharn's hands into position, wrapping the joint tightly, anchoring it above and below, then binding it to a splint fashioned from a broken ridge stake. Varn exhaled slowly. His skin had darkened slightly, a Xelari stress response. Scout approached, sat down near Varn's head, and stayed perfectly still. Varn looked at him. "Why is he watching me?" "Because you're hurt," Everett said. "He doesn't like when people are hurt." Tharn glanced between them. "He did not follow you." "Because I told him not to." "You gave a verbal command and he obeyed during a crisis." "Exactly." Tharn looked back down the slope. "We cannot descend that way safely." "Then we go up," Everett said, already unlocking the emergency beacon from his belt. "I'll call in a pickup. You two stay put." He pressed the beacon. The signal chirped once, then went silent. "Rescue will take 20 minutes, Tharn said. "Scout and I will bring water. He knows the route." Tharn nodded once. Everett jogged back toward their original path. Scout followed, light on his feet despite the earlier injury. They returned with canteens, just as the rescue drone crested the ridge. It hovered, then released a stretcher pod that settled beside them with a soft hiss and a mechanical chirp. Everett helped Varn onto the pod. The Xelari's leg had started to discolor, but the swelling hadn't worsened. "You'll need a proper scan," Everett said. "And ice, lots of it." Scout leaned in and gently nudged Varn's shoulder with his nose. Varn reached up and touched the dog's head. "You warned us before." "We did not listen," Everett shrugged. "Takes time to see what's been in front of you." Back at the station that evening, the wind had stilled completely. No ambient hum, no shifting dust, just the low crackle of cooling metal and faint insect clicks from the canyon floor. Tharn sat beside the supply crates, arms resting on his knees. "You won." Everett glanced up from where he was sorting the med kit. "Didn't know it was a competition, neither did I until I lost." Scout sat between them, tail still, ears tilted slightly toward the door. "I have filed a report," Tharn said. "It includes a recommendation about redefining baseline sentience parameters to include non-verbal, behaviorally complex species capable of pattern recognition, adaptive response, and empathetic action." Everett blinked. "You filed that for a dog." "I filed it for what he showed us." Scout yawned. Tharn stood. "We leave at sunrise. I suspect your world will continue throwing hazards your way." Everett leaned back. "Wouldn't be Earth if it didn't. Will he remain in service?" "For as long as he wants to." Scout wagged his tail once. Tharn inclined his head. "Then I wish him good fortune." Scout rose and walked to Tharn, pressing his side gently against the alien's leg. Tharn froze, then placed one hand on the dog's back. Everett watched them for a moment, then turned back to the med kit. "Guess he's saying goodbye," he said. "No," Tharn replied. "He is saying, you are safe." The next morning, the Xelari transport lifted off without ceremony, vanishing into the blue so quickly it could have been a mirage. Scout sat on the ridge for several minutes after, watching the sky. Everett stood beside him. "Think they got it?" Scout didn't move. "Yeah," Everett said. "I think so too."